Dr. Promise Etim, head of the Agricultural Engineering Department at Kwabam State University, is joining us at this hour to talk agriculture on the continent. Good afternoon, Dr. Etim. Good to have you on Spotlight Africa.
Good afternoon, Spectrum TV.
Thank you very much. So let's talk agriculture and let's look into some of the realities available on the continent. Amid all the regional crises that we also have in displacements of persons, where does agriculture stand right now on the continent?
Well, I think to a larger extent, agriculture is still subsidized at subsistence level in Africa, so to speak. And most countries, most nations of the world, most continents of the world have drifted from um, this level of farming to mechanized farming down to what you have as precision agriculture currently. So the level of in your introductory notes, you said that two-thirds of Africans are employed in agriculture. But I love to tell you that just 4.2% of Americans are involved in agriculture. Yet what they produce is enough to feed the entire United States and also for export purposes. And the big gap basically has to do with technology. The technological gap has provided a nexus, and that differentiates what these developed nations and developed continents have done, quite different from what we're trying to do in Africa. So that's the basic challenge. Adaptive technology peculiar to the African sub-region. That's the basic challenge. Though there are other issues that could also be linked to that. But I would say to a larger extent, we have not done 30% mechanization of agriculture in Africa, and will continue to be in this sort of situation because if you're not able to mechanize agriculture, there is that tendency that you will not be able to cater for this increasing population in the African sub-region. So it's quite a challenge.
So what would you say are the key factors for the underdevelopment of mechanized farming on the continent?
The key factors you asked.
Yes, for underdevelopment of mechanized farming on the continent.
Well, I think we must begin to look at developing indigenous technology, what I would call adaptive technology. Because we are in an environment that is somehow, some majority of African continent is temperate, it's temperate region. You go to certain places in Europe, in America, in Asia, and the likes, they have temperature and conditions that favor what they're doing, adaptive to the technology they have. When you come to Africa, for instance, you bring a machinery that has been very functional in Asia, you bring into the African climate. Sometimes those machines may not have the strength, may not have the features to adapt to this environment in Africa. So it becomes very difficult for you to have optimum production, optimum capacity in terms of performance for that machine. So the basic challenge for us in Africa is that we've not been able to develop indigenous and adaptive technology that can enable us to solve our own problems using these solutions that we've preferred within the African sub-region. We're dependent on what we can get from outside the continent, and the conditions there, perhaps the features or some of the things they have there are not in consonance with our climate. So it makes it difficult for it to be adaptive. We need to begin the process of engaging gear and developing our own indigenous technology that will be adaptive to our climate.
So, as as an educator yourself in the space of the Nigerian tertiary institution, how would you say that education and awareness is contributing to filling that available massive gap in the agricultural sector? For instance, how are students, being trained in your department faring? What's their mindset about, getting into agriculture on a larger scale to feed communities, states, and even at large to export?
Yeah, we we cannot just jump from the subsistence level of agriculture we are doing to full scale mechanization. There are levels of mechanization of agriculture. You have the low scale mechanization, medium scale, then you can have a larger scale, which is what is obtainable in some continents and some countries of the world. So the process now is to shift from this subsistence level of agriculture to what I would say low scale, low level mechanization, where these crude implements, you bring in technology that can help to mechanize some of the little implements that you need to use in the farm. So what we're doing currently, which is what most universities in the country are actually doing, is to develop a system that enables you to look at the problems within the environment and use the manpower available and resources to create sustainable solutions for these problems on a low scale basis and to transit to medium to high scale or large scale mechanization. That is where the industry and policymakers comes to the fore. So it's a challenge. For instance, in Nigeria, it's been difficult. But I must commend the President Tinubu-led administration. Recently, what the National Center for Agricultural Mechanization has been doing in the past 30 years, this is the first time a government in this country has recognized indigenous technology developed for the agricultural sector and are intentional about investing. That's why they want Nkam to expand the franchise of what they're doing to replicate some of the innovations, some of the technologies that they've been developed in the past 30 years to the entire West African sub-region and Nigeria as in principle. So when you don't encourage what is being done locally, you look forward to bringing technology that perhaps are not adaptive to the environment. It becomes difficult for sustainable results. So we are not intentional in this part of the climb towards investing in research, investing in how to replicate what has been done to an extent that it becomes more efficient for one to put it out there in the world map and say, look, this is what we've been able to do. So the little that the research institutions have been able to do in Nigeria stays within the confines of the institution because they are not encouraged. The policymakers and even the industry are not coming in to see what they can do to advance the cause of some of these innovations. That's the basic challenge in Nigeria and the West African sub-region in general.
Okay, so talking about discouragement and global markets, let's look at the effect of subsidized European agricultural products, often dumped, on the African market. And usually it comes in, with far lesser pricing. And the competition gap between our locally produced, products is usually a big problem for our smaller farmers. How can we leverage against this? Is there a possibility of kicking out the massive imports of agricultural produce on the continent, at this time?
It's even a more peculiar challenge as we speak now because some seedlings, some of the things that we grew locally 10 years ago have gone extinct. Reason being that the people, the policymakers, some key players in the industry have adopted what they buy, genetically modified products, what they buy from these countries that have different climatic factors. So planting, so you can't see parent stock of some of the seedlings that you would want to grow in this part of the climate. Maybe apart from cassava, apart from maybe stuff like maize, the others have gone extinct. So it's a very significant challenge. We must, as a matter of fact, encourage what we do here locally. Yes, it may not be enough, but consider the fact that you would also cause some sort of problem in the dollar market in trying to import these things from other countries. So if we encourage what is being produced here locally and invest intentionally in growing what we need to eat, because if you cannot grow what can sustain you as a family, you can't even think outside. The population of Nigeria has increased drastically over the years. So there is need for the government and even private individuals to be intentional about developing local seeds and local agricultural materials that are within this climate to ensure that we can replicate it in a state that we can have it at a sustainable rate to grow in continuous planting seasons. That's the challenge. So even if you want to go into mechanized farming as we speak, it is difficult to find indigenous seedlings to get the farm to work at the pace you would really, really, really love it to. So it's a big challenge. And for us, we were challenging crop scientists across Nigeria and the African sub-region to begin to track back. Let's look back at the things that we have that are quite indigenous so that we can develop them. Otherwise, in the next couple of years, we may not have what is indigenous to us again. We'll have to depend on GMOs that are coming from Europe, Asia, and the rest of the continent of the world.
Two key conversations that you have raised, and it's a conversation that is even in our national assemblies, and there are CSOs, civil society organizations, trying very strongly to fight against policies that enhance the importation of genetically modified crops and organisms into the country. As an expert in your field, what are your thoughts? Should the federal government stem down on its policy direction to make GMOs a staple, seed fabricator in the country? What are the pros and cons of embracing the GMO culture?
Well, the GMO is not adaptive to us in this climate. You would need to invest so much in terms of fertilizers, in terms of other inputs to be able to have maximum yield, as against some of the things that naturally you can grow them in your backyard, in your small scale farm. So that cost you incur as a farmer in getting these inputs in place so you can grow the GMOs optimally. If you add that cost to what you actually produce for, it will heighten the cost of production, thus having a significant impact in the larger market. So it is important for us to understand that what is not natural to you, when you bring it to your climate, you would need to find a way to condition it so that it fits into your climate. And that would mean increased amount of money and increased production cost for this produce. Thereby, there is no way a farmer would increase the cost of what he's producing for. That you would expect him to sell for less because, to be very sincere, everyone that is in farming, particularly at the level of private business, sees farming as business. So it would want to have maximum return on investment. So if that's not the case, it becomes difficult. So as a matter of policy, the federal government must be intentional about equipping our root crop research institutions. We have them about 7 in this country. Maybe the likes of IITA, National Root Crop Institute in Umodike, and the likes. We have them in larger numbers in Nigeria. Must begin to look at how to intentionally invest in these institutions to develop what we have already as indigenous to us, so we can have them at an expanded rate to cover the needs of farmers. So those who want to go into large-scale farming can leverage that. So it's something they need to consider, because the way it is going, our indigenous parent products are going extinct, and this is not the way to go.
So my question here would be, scholars like yourself and agricultural engineers across the country, are these standpoints that you're making clear to our lawmakers that GMO is not, it's more like buying solutions that foreigners created for growing crops in their nation to come and make solutions for a problem that you do not have? So our scholars in Nigeria, are they putting their foot down to tell our lawmakers that, look, this GMO should not be the way for us?
As ones who are directly involved in research, we've done our bidding through various institutions that we belong to, professional bodies and the likes, to engage in this advocacy to the authorities to understand that we need to stem the tide of this, and we need to encourage growth of indigenous parent stock of whatever that we need to grow. So it's something that we've done, but there's little you can do. I mean, you can only contribute to the process, but you're not the policymaker. The policymakers are actually the government and the lawmakers. So there's little or nothing you can do, but it is also very key to sustain the advocacy, and that's what we've done in the past few years, to sustain that advocacy for the authorities to begin to look in the direction of doing the right thing and ensuring that not just doing the right thing, that it is done optimally for the growth and, of course, development of Nigeria and Nigerians.
Okay, so just before I let you go, one critical issue that is evolving as a fight against agriculture is civilization and policies in terms of land tenure use and land tenure reforms.
Yeah.
We are seeing cases all the way to the Land Tenure Act of 1978. And even in states like Akwa Ibom, there have been stronger conversations in recent times to reenact, the ownership of states to lands. How is this going to affect agriculture in the long run?
I think it's a very, in fact, that's the biggest challenge to mechanization of agriculture in Nigeria and Akwa Ibom, if you look at it from any context, because land fragmentation, the land ownership system, it's so difficult a thing. And if you want 50 hectares to run mechanized farming somewhere, you find it very difficult to assess that. So what we need to do, I don't know how it's going to be how it's going to be possible to reject the Land Use Act of 1976, but I think after near 50 years of that, there is high need for us to review that law in line with present day realities to allow these farmers, to allow people who want to go into large scale mechanization, large scale farming, to assess farmlands for what they need to grow. So it is difficult. If you want to get 50 hectares of land, you may need to see 6 to 7 different communities, buy off the land from them, and see different families that have these lands joined together to be able to settle one of them one after the other, can even increase the initial cost of production. So it's a challenge. We need to sit as a people to define what we want for the future of Africa, for the future of Nigerians, for the future of Akwa Ibom people, to define what we want. If of the truth we really want to see large-scale mechanized farming, we must be intentional about reviewing the Land Use Act that currently is obtainable in the country after 49, getting to 50 years.
All right, then. I'll just take your final words as we wrap up on this particular interview segment. Akwa Ibom State government, for instance, has encouraged us to grow what we eat. So everyone has been encouraged to own a garden or a small farm behind their houses. How should individuals contribute to fight food insufficiency on the continent as we wrap up?
Yes, individuals should understand that hunger knows no political party. Hunger knows no religion. Hunger knows no sort of social or whatever orientation, what belongs to. So all hands must be on deck. Like you've said, I've talked about the garden. If there's a little place you can just plant little things like tomato, onions, pepper, the cost is something else in the market as we speak. So if you can grow that in your backyard, that's fine. You can do that can sustain your home. That will lessen the pressure on the market in general terms. So we must begin to build this consciousness where we speak strongly against policies of government that encourages rural to urban drift, because young men and women of productive age between 18 and 45 are leaving the rural communities in droves. And agriculture is a rural business. More than 70% of agriculture is done in rural centers. So if you don't have these able-bodied men and women should be engaged in the process of production, if you have them leave the rural communities because of basic social amenities that they are not, exposed to, it becomes difficult to even talk about increasing production, because everyone is seeking for greener pasture, seeking for where they can have better livelihood. So we must consciously think of developing the rural communities so we can have these young persons to be encouraged to stay in the rural communities. And some of us who are in the city centers will also be encouraged and endeared to the rural communities by virtue of the facilities that are in the rural centers. So rural development should be a core mandate of the local government, of the state, and even the federal government going forward, if we are to leverage the opportunities and options that we have to grow the agri sector in Akwa Ibom, Africa, and Nigeria, and of course, within the West African sub-region, which is, for me, a primary concern.